Well, greetings everybody. This is going to be a fairly brief update video. Uh, I'm doing it just because it has been so long. A few people have asked where I've been. It's not going to be long because if you can't tell, my powers of speech are much diminished of recent times. They should get better, but I did want to make a recording of them just for my own uses. This not only sounds different, it's actually difficult to maintain. When I talk, sometimes it can induce coughing, and also my ability to swallow is much diminished, and so uh, just the intake of my own saliva is actually a difficult process at this point. Some of these updates, though, uh, they are pertinent to like studies of libertarianism, so I thought I'd put them out there. I never want this to be a channel just about my life and what's going on. But if you wait long enough, pretty soon your life and pertinent libertarian theory are going to interact, or at least they should if you're doing anything right. So the two things that are probably the most interesting, and I've been reading this whole time, so there are things to talk about there, but I haven't felt particularly motivated to cover any of them. But very late last year, I made the decision to move from where I'd grown up in northern Michigan. There were a couple places I considered, and so the decision that I eventually made should not be viewed out of that context. It wasn't this place or no other. There are a couple criteria that I was looking forward to, and this place met many of them. And I know it looks like this is a chore, it is, but I actually really want to have a recording. My voice was actually considerably different from this a few days ago, to the point where I had none at all. So, if anything, it's slightly going to be comical in the future. Anyway, the eventual choice that I settled on was New Hampshire, and the direct implication there is an accurate one. The Free State Project was definitely a draw. I'm not totally on board with everything that the Free State Project either does or plans to do, or the activities of every member, although how could that ever be true with any organization that's bigger than one person? But there is a certain appeal to that. Among other things, I wanted to live in a different part of the country, in a more urban environment than I was used to. There are several things. And so I made the decision very late last year. I was in a very good position financially to do it. I had time off work, indeed, more than enough time, more than enough money. It wasn't an hour never, but it was essentially an ideal time. I moved, I think on January 4th or 5th, and then the ruffle in my plans occurred as I was moving. I developed a very minor sore throat, one that was barely detectable. On my way here, staying at a hotel in New York, I developed very, very strange muscle aches and chills. They weren't particularly painful. I just felt very sensitive. However, it passed when I woke in the morning. I wasn't particularly concerned, but the symptoms persisted. I got a place. I'm renting a room in the den of libertarianism in a house that's owned by a Free Stater and rented out all to Free Staters, so all libertarians in this place. So it's a nice place to socialize. And and that's what I have to go through to swallow anything, by the way. It's not fun. I was able to socialize a little bit in some of the libertarian and Free Stater themed areas here. I was able to meet some so-called celebritarians, some of which you are most certainly familiar with, at least most of you. Those interactions weren't particularly substantive, but still might be noteworthy to some people, as are the opinions, and they are mixed to be sure, about so-called celebritarians. I don't want to go into it right now. I think that I'm in a position that I should absorb a great deal more. But other than libertarian ideology, I absorbed something else apparently, because after I had been here a few days, my symptoms just kept persisting. They weren't terribly horrible or anything, but if they don't go away very soon, I do begin to get worried. I went to the doctor. I don't have insurance, but I do have money, and that's all you really have to have. The doctor said that my symptoms were common for any number of viral infections. Let's see, tonsillitis, with mono, with any kind of flu or the cold, and with certain bacterial infections like strep, especially the sore throat being kind of the dead giveaway, although strep usually is not going to affect other things causing like muscle aches and pains and that sort of thing, which I had, although they were pretty minor. Strep tests came back negative, so they were pretty confident it was a viral infection, although what kind they weren't sure. It was recommended. No medication was offered. They correctly, I assume, since they came negative on the stress, did not prescribe any antibacterials, since those are overprescribed, and there's the chance that you can build immunity within the bacteria, which is certainly not something that's desirable. So they encouraged me to gargle salt water, which appeared to be very effective, by the way. The sore throat symptoms declined to where they were almost gone within a day or two, and I thought that I was past. And then they suddenly became much, much worse. And when I say worse, I mean if you type tonsil infection in Google Images, there are very few there that the pictures I took of my own tonsils couldn't match. Both of them swelled to probably, I don't know, be about the size of walnuts, to where they were sealing off my throat. Not only were they swelled, they became covered in white. Now it looks like a growth, and so it's easy to kind of think of that as bacteria. It's actually pus. It's very common for the throat when it becomes infected to generate this. There's unfortunately many conditions that can cause it, including strep and mono and the flu and tonsillitis. It's extremely revolting. I'm not going to post pictures, but I do have them. And it became harder and harder to swallow until I couldn't. I couldn't eat solid foods. I still haven't had any solid foods now in about a week. Not a week, maybe 4 days. And then I couldn't take liquids, and then by noon yesterday, I was unable to even swallow my own saliva. I had to spit it out, and I realized whatever I had was irrelevant. If I can't take in fluids, I'm going to have dehydration problems even if I was healthy, let alone if I'm fighting off an infection, as I clearly was. So I called the doctor, which is an interesting conversation because my powers of speech were much diminished, so there was a much, I had been there one other time when the conditions began to come back, and they had decided to do an explicit mono test. So they drew blood for that. They said it could take up to a week. Fortunately, it didn't, because I'd still be waiting for results. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I did get the results, and it was positive, so I contracted mono. It's actually very common, although the effects that it has vary quite a bit. I'm at this point quite convinced that I contracted mono probably 4 to 6 weeks ago in Michigan. The symptoms usually take that long to manifest. And the symptoms are generally on their own relatively mild. Now, short of the moniker this disease often has, which is the kissing disease, I don't normally see it listed as a sexually transmitted disease. But I think that it would be fair to do so, because my contraction of the illness correlates very highly with my sudden ability and activity of sex. I've been working through the potential carriers here, and none stand out yet. But that's assuming their honesty here. Needless to say, it is a lesson hard learned. And of course, it's not to say that's exactly why. It is possible to contract the disease without doing anything that physical. But I think in my case, it's very likely the cause. In any event, the initial conditions were not uh, that terrible. They were annoying and noteworthy, but not hospitalizing, whereas the closed throat definitely was. And the pain, I can't even explain. How can water be painful? It's beneath, I don't understand how, but it was. Anyway, I was prescribed 5 medications, uh, a local anesthetic to swish in my mouth, which numbs, very effective, very numbing. Unfortunately, no amount of gargling or swishing I could do would actually cause it to numb my tonsils and my lower throat, which is the area that's bothering me. So I was able to generate a very numb tongue and cheeks, areas that, quite frankly, feel fine. And by being numb, it was actually more difficult to manipulate fluids in my mouth, which was necessary when it took so much concentration to even attempt to swallow anything. However, the perspective of changing this illness from something that I can easily afford to something that would bankrupt me if I had to go to a hospital, which is what I was basically offered with if I was going to have to go there to take fluids through an IV, which was basically the next step. My doctor put it to me pretty bluntly: if I was able to take fluids on my own, I would be fine. And if I was not able to take them on my own, I mean, eventually be fine. There's no cure for mono, but your body will learn how to defeat it on its own eventually. If I was, however, unable to take fluids, mono or otherwise, I would need hospitalization, and I know enough about the pricing involved to know that's nothing I care for at this time. So I was also prescribed a muscle relaxant, a painkiller, and also antibacterial. They performed multiple strep tests. The doctor and his assistant actually both noted that I was emitting an odor that reminded them of strep, which I found very interesting. I'd actually noticed it too, although I didn't associate it with strep. Anyway, even though the test came back negative, he decided that it could be any number of bacterial infections. Strep's simply the most common. When you have a reduced immunity, anything could cause a problem. And so an antibacterial additive was also included. And probably my most Herculean efforts to ever swallow anything. And I have made pretty Herculean efforts to swallow things in my time. I managed to take them all. It wasn't pretty, and it induced a coughing spell, which I will say is not very fun to have when your throat is closed. But I managed to take it all down, and within a few hours I was able to take fluids, and actually by that night my tonsils started to show in spots from beneath the white pus, apparently. And today they're about 50-50. It still looks revolting, and it's still very painful to swallow, but I can do it essentially at will. I was able to take, at the suggestion of a friend of mine, I started eating frozen orange juice, which was probably the best thing I've ever had in my life, or at least it tasted that way. Yesterday, after I took the meds, it took me 3 hours to drink 1 glass of Ensure, just to give you some idea on the level of fluid intake I was capable of. But I slept pretty well and have been able to drink fluid since. So, although at no point was I physically terribly ill, there definitely was discomfort because of the throat, but there was also a ticking See, I couldn't do that before. As like excruciating as that is, and annoying, and horrible, like uninteresting it makes food, it's definitely a step up from being unable to do that. So the worst is not necessarily over. In fact, even if this bacterial infection is gone, until the mono itself is not gone but totally suppressed, I'm going to basically be self-quarantined, because any other bacterial infections pose the potential to cause similar harm. I don't want my throat to swell shut again, so I'm going to avoid that as much as possible. So, needless to say, my activism in the Free State will be somewhat limited. My roommates have been very supportive, offering to do what's necessary as long as I was courteous about doing what's best to not infect them. Fortunately, none of them are people I plan to make out with anytime soon. So they should be relatively safe, but we're taking extra precautions just in case. I would feel terrible if any of them were to become infected. So I know that's a lot of personal details. There's, of course, certain critiques of the medical system that could be offered. My experience hasn't been too negative. I was able to afford out of pocket. Of course, everyone asks if you have insurance, and then they give you a suspicious look when you say that you don't. But really, who gives a shit? Cash is king. I have no problem paying out of pocket for what I've had to cover so far, which hasn't been cheap by any means, but certainly not beyond my ability to pay readily. I don't know if I want to do it forever or some multiple of this, which is, of course, why I've practically gagged myself to avoid going to the hospital, because I know that the bills add up very quickly when you're paying directly. They have the courtesy to ask if you're okay with the price and what your options are. You know, the pharmacy came to me when I said I had no insurance, and they said, do you want to look at these before you agree to this? And I didn't have a problem with any of that. Same thing with the doctor's office. It's a very pay-as-you-go for the services you get. Not a, you step in this building and before you leave, you know, you don't have any say when you leave and how much we're going to bill you beforehand. So I'm confident I'll be able to avoid that situation, at least for now. So there are interesting things to talk about regarding the Free State Project. I'm sure there'll be many more once I start socializing with them more than I already have. But I did want to let you all know that that's what's going on with me. Actually, my work called today, ironically enough, of course, asking if I would be ready to go, but they're not in a position to coerce me to go, a wage slave though I may be. It wasn't something that they have the power to do. Fortunately, we can retain a good working relationship. They totally understood. It's kind of open-ended too, because Mono is so different between different people, and they just said, whenever you feel ready, let us know. So there's no pressure. I'd like to get back to work. You know, it's very interesting. I'm in the best financial position really I've ever been in my life, but your priorities start to change when you get an income to where it doesn't matter how many zeros there are in your checking account or your bank account or how much precious metal you have. You know, you don't feel right if you don't have an income. I'm not going to rush it at this point, obviously. I don't need to. It is an interesting change in priorities. I remember, what was his name? The guy who owns Wendy's, Dave, what was his name? Anyway, yeah, he talked about how he thought if he ever had $10,000 in the bank, he wouldn't even get out of bed because what could you possibly do with $10,000? And, of course, I have a great deal more than that in the bank, but of course there's inflation, so it's probably less in terms of purchasing power. It's interesting that you still feel like you need to go out there and earn, even though you have multiple years of your resources already like physically available to you. But, you know, I have plans above the room that I'm renting, luxurious as it is. As you can see, I could not bring all of my books. I think I brought about 150 that I deem the most important to read in the next near future. So hopefully that kind of forced a prioritization on my part. So no more books on grizzly bears, I guess. But I should probably use my time of convalescence to plow through some of these. I don't know if videos will follow. I don't know how long my voice is going to change this way. I'm even noticing, and it's starting to feel a little bit different just as I talk. Like the changes have been pretty rapid so far, even before I started taking antibiotics. I imagine they'll continue to be pretty swift. But yeah, that's where I've been, and as terrible as mono is, you know, it still only kept me from making a 20-minute video as opposed to a 40-minute video. Of course, this is today and not yesterday. Yesterday was a different story. You know, so anyway, that's where I am. There will be more videos about the Free State Project and my impressions thus far of it, which are, you know, I got to rub a lot of shoulders and talk with my roommates who know quite a bit about it. You can't really see, it's too dark in there. You don't want to see, trust me. Actually, you know, if I held it right up to the camera, you probably could because there are lights on the camera. I'd ask for feedback, but I know that I wouldn't get it till after I decided one way or the other. So I have photographs. If anyone's terribly interested, I'm sure I can make them available to you, but my guess is that most of you are not. Anyway, thanks again. Happy New Year to everybody. I know it's belated, but whatever. And I don't know, I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.